Hey guys, what's up? This is Nachos, and in this video we're going to review some footage that I shot about half a year ago. There's going to be some 1K, some 5K, maybe higher, I can't remember, and it's going to be on GG. And we're just going to take the spots as they come here. So first of all here, you could c-bet the flop at some frequency, and then this makes it in there at some frequency, I'm assuming, although probably some weaker 3x are going to be in there more. Actually, it might be just pure checking. It has a pretty bad properties of bluff, like we get some reversed implied odds. When we hit a 4 and we have an ace high, which has some showdown EV, meaning there's sub range of the game tree where we are able to check it down, or we might be able to bet to call like 1 or sometimes 2 smaller bets. So yeah, reasonable check there. All right, on the top right, we have a flush draw and we decide to c-bet it for min sizing, which is going to be reasonable, just betting my entire range here. On the turn we make a flush. We are going to sometimes have to check back with flushes, although not very often. And in most cases you can just get away, like if you're playing in a lower stakes environment, you can get away with just always betting your flushes, because checking your flushes could be a pretty gigantic punt. If you don't handpick like the correct ones, yeah, like betting it is never going to be a mistake. So we end up betting and our opponent folds, which is fine. On the top left we have a limped pot and we have a pair. We face a half pot bet and we are just going to call all our 5-out pairs here versus the recreational, meaning we are just going to call every king, 3 or deuce. And pocket fours is just calling as well, so any pair I think we just call there. On the turn we face a half pot. I think again we are just going to call, I imagine. This is still going to be okay versus a recreational to call, I think. It is close though. Kind of hope that I call here, but I could see myself fold. So, I call, nice. I'm not leading the river here versus the recreational. He's going to make some mistakes, checking back some stuff that should be betting. This might be one of those hands, but still, like check raising is just going to work so well because the recreational is over calling after betting the river in position. So yeah, just betting, checking and collecting the chips there. I could bet at some frequency. I think we mostly just want to check. On the top left, facing a bet, we are calling all our 5-out pairs. Something like 4s, deuces, 3s is going to become indifferent, I imagine, in these positions, but here we just check. And on the river I think we just check and hopefully win the hand. Don't do it. I did it. I did it. And I don't think we can change it into a bluff. It's not horrible. It's not horrible, but I don't think it's a thing in equilibrium. I must have had some sort of timing tell, and then that would be fine. On the top left we play a limped pot and we check to the recreational. The recreational is betting half pot here, and we definitely want to check raise here in this scenario because it's a recreational. He's going to make mistakes. He's going to put too much money into the pot with hands that really shouldn't. You can see that I'm decide the sizing and I actually go pretty big, which I like. Force him to make a mistake with hands like ace king, ace queen, king queen, stuff like that. 2 overcards that should mostly be folding versus that sizing, but now I might make the mistake of calling there. So I like going big there. You could go 10 big blinds, that would be fine as well. Here on the bottom right at 25.50 we are 3-betting ace king. If Ignacio Mon is 4-betting us, we just jam mostly, I think. Here we are playing versus a weaker player. He's not really a very big recreational. He's just a little bit of a recreational. And on this texture we just bet our entire range for small sizing. Not much to be said there. Just got a bet. I would be betting the turn quite often as well. It's an interesting spot. However, I think we want to go and bet small, but it's kind of a weird spot. I'm not entirely sure. I think I'm just going to bet small here and bet every ace at least, and maybe even something like kings, queens, and just make sure that his hands like pocket 10s and stuff like that are indifferent. That's good, or at least it's not bad. On the bottom left we open king deuce. I'm just going to go ahead and bet small, I think, on this texture, and just get some out of folds by overcards that the recreational is going to cold call from the small blind. On the turn it becomes kind of close whether I want to bet this. We are better off betting jack 10, queen jack, queen 10 type hands. Also hands that block some more pocket pairs would probably be better, as the pocket pairs are probably going to be calling. So I think checking here is fine, and then on the river we are definitely going to be value betting our hand, and we want to go, I like the pot size sizing here, so full pot seems pretty cool. Yeah, I go with a large sizing and I kind of like that. Actually go with an overbet, just to make sure that something like pocket 10s and pocket 7s is going to make a significant mistake calling there. Opening king jack on table 3, we get a call by the big blind here. Board comes down king jack deuce, and this is a texture where you can pick a couple of different strategies. I go with a polar strategy here of betting 80%. I think you can probably bet, you should probably go for an overbet if you want to be very precise, but the EV difference is going to be negligible. And then on the turn here, we get a quick check. Villain should have some leads, especially if we bet very large on the flop. Now there's less leads as the flush closing card doesn't necessarily interact as much with the out of position player's range when he has some more stuff that's calling versus an 80% flop bet as well. So in other words, if we overbet the flop, villain is going to fold a lot of the gut shots that don't have spades. But now versus the 80% bet, he's still calling those, and therefore the 3 does hit the out of position player more than the in position player, not to the point where you want to have a significant leading range. That would be my guess. We get a check here. We should be betting at a fairly decent rate, but still I think there are some leads in out of positions strategy, and so if he doesn't find those, then the expert would be checking more as the in position player. Either way is going to be fine in equilibrium, I think, so just checking back is fine. And I think versus an overbet here, we have such a good hand to call. It's kind of annoying, but with a spade and a top pair, I think we just pay the man his money, and we get a bit unlucky. I think he should be thinking about check raising the river now, because he's really blocking checkbacks quite hard. Although I'm going to presumably value bet some 10x as well, so that's probably fine. Never mind, yeah, seems reasonable. On table 1 we are 3-betting 7s versus the same player where we lost the bigger pot against just a few seconds ago. Facing a 4-bet, our hand ends up calling pure here. All of the pocket pairs are calling pure or near pure. We just do quite okay still, and the price that we're getting makes it so that we can't fold an awful lot, so the pocket pairs are still calling. And obviously we think a very good flop. Question is, what do we want to do here? We definitely check, but do we want to check raise at a reasonable frequency? And the answer is, it depends. And it depends largely on how dry the board is. If the board is very dry, you want to do very little check raising. If the board is more connected and dry like this one, you can do some more check raising, especially if you don't have the club. So if we have 9s with a club, we are going to be check calling a bit more. Now 7s without a club is going to be jamming more. Same thing goes for stuff like aces, ace queen, that is going to jam sometimes. It just wants to make sure that we get the money in now before the board complicates too much, and just basically run the equity. I end up calling here, which I think is okay, not perfect, and I end up leading the turn, which is probably okay. I am going to have some jacks that want to lead queens, 7s, 9s, and I'm going to have some flushes. I think it's pretty non-standard though, and I don't like. I prefer to just jam the flop. This is just a bit too fancy. Seems cool, but in fact I actually don't think it is. Top right is an interesting hand here. We are defending king deuce, so yeah, we call king deuce and we see a flop. Our opponent ends up betting big here, or big-ish at least, like half pot. And after facing a larger bet, so not a range bet, but a mixed frequency bet on the flop, on a flush closing and straight closing turn like this, you are going to have some leads. Like actually the flush closing isn't great for leading, but the straight closing would be okay. So the way this works is the bigger he's betting on the flop, the more we want to lead on like a naked 3 type hand. And the reason is we are just calling hands that connect more with the 4 and the 5 and the 9. And so if a turn call card rolls off that also connects with that, that is going to be pretty good for us, and a little bit less for our opponent. And then we want to lead a sizing that is small, so 20% of the pot roughly, and we can size down if it's a texture that is not necessarily going to be led very often, or if it is a flop sizing that was a little bit smaller like we see here. The combination of the two makes me think that I'm probably leading a bit too much, although I do go for the min sizing here. I think the min sizing is okay. We are going to have some leads, but yeah, we got to be a bit careful that we're not leading too much. We are going to have some 3-bets here, so 3-betting this is going to be fine. Calling would be fine as well. Both options are reasonable. I think calling I like a little bit more, simply because we can get it in. Sometimes we get a bluff by the ace of clubs, and then those hands are going to bluff the turn and the river. So yeah. On the bottom right here we open deuces and we flop a set, which is good. Ignacio Moron, Nacho 1112 or something like that on PokerStars is calling, and he's leading this texture, which I think is fine. He's going to have a ton of sets here and some flushes. I end up calling the flop. Unlike mono textures, both players have a lot of flushes, so generally speaking you don't want to be raising an awful lot, because you want to make sure that some of those top hands make it in both ranges. So let's say we are going to go and raise very aggressively with our flushes. What ends up happening is the times that we call, we don't have flushes, and since both players' ranges contain a lot of flushes, we need to be careful and we need to make sure that our calling ranges are protected as well. Otherwise, our opponent is just going to be up to bet very large, and then we have two options. Either we overfold, which means he can just bet large always, or we end up calling our very weak and capped range. And that means that his flushes are going to make too much. So always play relatively, like there's a lot of slow playing on these textures, and so I can get behind my call on the flop and call on the turn. Here when he checks to us, he should still have flushes, and so we got to be a bit careful. I think we still got to bet, although like it's a pair texture, never mind. Here on the turn we're just going to bet on the river, and hopefully we get the money in at this point. I'm going to go for a smaller sizing, which should allow him to check raise, although it's really hard to nail the check raising frequency. There's one sizing for him, I think, if he wants to go check raise, and that is all in, even this deep, and we would just call an all in. I was going to say I think he has something like a pocket pair, but yeah, he makes a relatively ambitious call there, I think. So we face an open by the legend on the table, and we decide to 3-bet here with ace-5 suited, which is fairly standard. I'm going for a larger size, which I think is fine. And we get a call. On the flop here, I probably need to check occasionally with my range, but I think I can bet at a fairly high frequency, and my hand is probably just fine to bet always. I'm probably going to go ahead and range bet this, although I should probably pick a slightly smaller sizing if I want to do that. And we're getting like folds by overcards, which is just going to be great. My opponent shouldn't really have that many queens. Like he's going to have pocket queens and some ace queen that is calling the flop. Maybe the occasional king queen is calling as well, but some of those king queen are going to be king queen of clubs, so that can't happen. Queen jack is mostly going to be folding, I think, on the flop, so yeah, this is going to be a texture that is going to be pretty good for the out of position player, as the in position player just folds more of the queens on the flop, and we still have them quite often. We are just going to be betting queen jack, queen 10 stuff more often than the in position player is calling those hands. So I think I get the bet at a fairly high frequency for a smaller sizing, which you see me do here. I think my hand is going to bet the turn always, and then this river is somewhat uncomfortable. I think we just want to go all in here. It is a bit weird, but the SPR is very small. My opponent is going to have to call pocket jacks, pocket 10s, some 7x occasionally, queen x occasionally, and we're splitting versus some aces. I don't think checking makes an awful lot of sense. We could block bet for a small, but I think mainly we just want to go all in. If we are going to check, then it will be a close call, to be honest. If we face the shove here, which we do, it's just a very shitty spot. I end up calling because I river top pair, and what can you do? But it's definitely not a slam dunk call. Probably should have thought about it a little bit more, but yeah. That's live. Here we are playing 25-50 again. Opening aces from early position. A very standard open, obviously. What else are we going to do? Maybe in a full ring game, you might want to limp sometimes, but there are no antes. I think this is just fine. And we get another call. This is a very good texture, both for our range as well as our hand. I think we just want to bet here, and just betting small seems reasonable. This way we can bet some ace king, ace queen, potentially some ace jack, although multi-way that gets relatively thin, I think. That way we can still bet a reasonable amount. Getting check raised here is pretty much the dream. There's nothing we can do but call. It doesn't make sense to raise here. We just want to make sure that every 10, every flush draw is going to keep putting money into the pot. Every bluff that he has, we want to just keep in there, and we just want him to hopefully put a lot of pressure on us. I think on the turn here, he's probably incentivized to bet at a small sizing quite often. He's definitely going to have some checks in equilibrium. We could potentially check here, but I think mostly we just want to bet, and the sizing that we are going to pick is again small, and just bet at a high frequency. Like this is not where you're allowed to bet at a very high frequency, simply because your opponent is generally having a slightly weaker range. And then on the river here, we just want to, we definitely want to have some jams here. Since we unblock calls here with like 10x that is going to call, some diamonds that are going to call, I think jamming is probably not the worst option, but it is a bit greedy. Tough spot for my opponent. I'm thinking that he probably has a 10 here, and like one of the things that he might be contemplating there is, am I going to shove flushes, which I don't think I should. So if you have a 10, you have like a pretty decent bluff catcher, especially if you have a diamond to go with it. In case, like let's say if king 10 with the king of diamonds there, I think it's going to be an okay call. But you don't need to call very often there, which is like the key point. So most of his hands should be folding. I think my sizing is okay there. After he check calls the turn, he never has a boat. I have boats still. So I think I definitely want to have a very large sizing, and jamming is going to be fine. On the bottom left here, I open king 10 suited on 50-100, one of the higher stakes that I've played in my life. And I go ahead and block bet. The big blind is a guy I've played with before at 5-10, so it seems like he has moved up as well. Although he might probably be playing these games more often, because this is an exception for me. And we block bet, and our opponent raises. It's kind of an awkward spot to be in, but I think with a backdoor straight draw and a backdoor flush draw, we have to at least not fold. We can consider 3-betting from time to time. One of the biggest mistakes that the pool makes is not 3-betting that note enough, because you're out of position and you need to 3-bet like 15% on average or something like that. Having said that, we call. Turn is a 7, is going to be okay for our range, I think. And then the river is a flush closing card. Like we block some random queens that are going to be raising the flop occasionally, so king queen, queen 10. And in addition to that, we have a fair amount of flushes here, and it's relatively hard for us to have an unpaired hand. Obviously we're going to have some backdoor stuff like this, so it's definitely possible for us to have an unpaired hand, but we're going to have plenty of hands that either make a pair and can't really bluff, or like stuff like 7-6, 7-8, or like 2 hearts, and those hands obviously want the value bet now. So it's relatively tough to have an awful lot of bluffs. We're going to have, like I said, some backdoors like this, and I think those hands just need to bluff. I just go for a bigger sizing because, like I said, we have flushes. Our opponent doesn't have as many. He should have some, but I think most players are going to barrel their flush draws too often on the turn. So going big here puts a lot of pressure on that range and makes it so that our flushes are making the maximum versus that very capped range by him. He can overfold, which means hands like this are making more. He can call appropriate amount, and then our flushes make more. It doesn't really matter what he does for our strategy to be more profitable if we bet big here. Unfortunately, he calls this time, and he has a reasonable bluff catcher. The flop raise is a bit ambitious, but probably fine. And the bluff catcher is actually pretty good as well. He has flush blocker, and he's blocking the flush draws that I'm going to float most, the ace-high flush draws. So he definitely blocks value. He doesn't really block bluffs, so well played by him. I just got a bit unlucky there, nothing we can do. Here opening king jack, the same player on the cutoff calls. We go to flop, jack 7-5. I check my entire range there, and the in position player should have some smaller bets and checks mostly. And then on this turn, I think we want to check our hand mostly. We get a quick check back, and I was going to say we probably have the best hand by the river. He's going to check back some ace highs though, so this might be a bit greedy on my end, because he's definitely going to have some ace 10 suited, ace 4 suited, hands that are going to connect with this river. I block bet very small and our opponent still calls, but I think it's a bit too greedy with my hand, to be honest, to be able to do that. Open and a cold call, we have king queen, and the cold call is a recreational, so I think we just want to squeeze relatively aggressively here. This might be a bit cuspy in these positions, but it's going to be fine since we can get heads up with the recreational quite often, and that is going to be very profitable. We end up betting relatively large on the flop. I think that is going to be a good strategy. We just want to make sure that we are all in by the river in most cases, and just cheating a bit with our sizings is going to be fine, because if we bet bigger, that means that our smaller range is going to be weaker, but our opponent is not going to be check raising appropriately. So we don't need to protect our small betting range too much. We can just go and bet large 3 times and hopefully get all in by the river. Run out is obviously very good here, so hopefully we can get a call and win his entire stack. But unfortunately we get a quick fold. We are opening 5 deuce suited on the top right. Normally a hand that we would fold, but since the big blind is quite nitty and the small blind is a recreational, we can open it, as we're not getting 3-bet as often. And when you don't get 3-bet as often, the EV of opening goes up, as you're just realizing more equity. Here I end up going a little bit bigger on the flop. I think this is fine versus recreational. That is not going to be paying attention to our sizings too much. He's not going to suddenly check raise very often versus a smalling sizes, so we don't need to be as balanced. This particular hand though, we could probably just bet small anyway. It doesn't really strike me as a big bet, a hand that benefits a lot from betting bigger. And we bet large, he raises, we go in and we run our equity, and it seems like we hold and win this entire stack. And on the top right, we are going to have the last hand of this session. Our opponent opens 2.5x, and it is one of the bigger recreationals. He just plays way too many hands, is kind of loosey-goosey, and so we want to 3-bet. I think we can actually go a little bit bigger versus a guy like this, but having said that, we still are just going to have to 3-bet always. We have a couple of options on the flop. I end up checking on the A-side texture, which is fine. On the turn, I check again, no reason to bet. We just want him to bluff if he has a bluff, so we don't want him to, we don't want to bet and then he folds check 10. We just want to check and then hopefully he bluffs it. And then by the time we're at the river here, we're always going to call, I think, versus a player like this. A guy that is just willing to gamble and bluff a lot, you just end up having to call there sometimes, which is the name of the game. Luckily he checks back, which is a higher EV line for us, and we win the pot. Right, so that's it for this video. If you guys have any questions, feel free to drop a comment down below. Feel free to join our free Discord server, link down below. And if you guys have any questions, hit me up in the chat. Talk to you guys soon. Jesus, what fucking stupid is this?